right, ready.
Okay, so at the end of last week, we were left with a kind of a question that I was going to look at and determine of what the proper way of looking at this issue. And the question was, um, we were trying to find out how you could have a case of ribis by Hagdish, and we're saying that it's not ribis. What's the case? So the case was where someone donated stones for the building of the Bedek Habayis, so the building base of Mikdash or Mizbeach, whatever. So those stones do not have the imprimatur of Hagdish until the building is complete. In other words, the stones themselves, even though they were donated, they're on their way to Hagdish, but they're not Hagdish. So the Gemara tells us that if those stones were lent out and came back and someone paid 20, 30%, whatever it was, well, the stones, that's not ribis because it's Hagdish. Okay, we went through several iterations and that's how we came out. So then the question came up, what happens if there's more stones that are needed for the base of Mikdash? In other words, if someone donated 100 stones, you needed 80 or 90. What's the status of those extra stones? So in order to, I can give you the answer, or I could say, let's hold off because what we're going to learn today is really going to help us understand that question. In other words, if there's an overflow, and we're saying that the Hagdish is only when the stones are turned into a binyan, to a building, then maybe the stones shouldn't have Kedusha. Okay, they were given, fine, it's a matana, but maybe they shouldn't have any because it's not Hagdish until it's built. So they have a powerful response to say that it shouldn't be Hagdish. So again, I took a close look, and of course, when I was learning for the Gemara for this week, which I hadn't really thought about last week, the answer came. Okay, so let's just hold, but that is the question, and that's what we're going to answer. So now we're holding on Nun Zayin Omid Beis, and we are Shoy Mechinam. Where is that? That's okay. So
I believe it's actually, I think it's just
the
across,
middle
there's a
page,
Tosfos Shomer Chinam, and it's just across from that upper line, I think.
right? Okay. So right. So now, just looking quickly back at the Mishnah enumerated the 4 areas of which there's no anah, and we said there were avodim, shtaris, karkos, and hegdish. We said there's no kefel and arba chamisha, and we learned that last week. So there's no, if they're stolen, then there is no, and you find the ganef, then there is no kefil, paying double. And if it's an ox or a sheep and they were, killed or slaughtered or whatever, where normally there would be arba chamisha, there's no arba chamisha. So we see that many of the rules that we're accustomed to are suspended when it comes to these areas. So now the next subject in the Mishnah had to do with Shoy Mechinam. In other words, well, first Shoy Mechinam, Shoy Mesacher, but the question is, do they have to swear? Because a Shoy Mechinam, in order to get out, if he can just swear that he wasn't negligent, then fine, then he's potter. He doesn't have to repay. So here the question is, if he was entrusted with Hagdish, what does he do? Because Hagdish is not like anything else. So Hagdish, what do? Do you make him swear that he was not negligent? So the Gemara says, okay, so now the Gemara is going to give us and explain to us what the source of that is. And it says as follows. How do we know that he's freed from a shvua? The Tana Rabbanan, because the Rabbanan learned from the pasuk in the Torah. What is the pasuk? Ki yiten ish el re'ehu. If a person will give to his friend kesef or kalim, then v'nigna b'beis of ish. Then that's the pasuk. So So what we're going to learn is this, which we say in the Karbonos, before davening, klalu prata klal, and adon ella haprat, where you have a klal, a general rule, generalization, and then you have a prat, something specific, and then you have another klal. So you have three different things you're being taught. Then we say that you go ke'ein haprat. What is the sort of the middle of the sandwich is the prat, and that's what you follow. So what are we talking about here? Yitin ish kalal. That's a generalization. The person will give to his friend. What does he give? Kesef kalim, kesef kalim. That's the prat. That's now the object of our discussion. The niknav b'beitzo ish, and then it's now stolen from the man's house. Again, that's a generalization. Also the klal. Klal pratu klal I atodon elakain haprat. So when you have a klal and a klal at the end and a prat in the middle, then we follow the prat. Now, what is the prat here? The prat is kesef kalim. So what does that mean? Says the Gemara, we're going to define the prat. What are the characteristics of the prat that they have in common, kesef and kalim, is that they are metaltalin, right? They're not karka, they are movable objects. And they're worth money. In other words, there's worth to these items. If we say any davar metaltalin in gufa mamon is it's also included. What's not included? Yotza karkos. So now we're going to go to our Mishnah. What the first thing was karka she'ena metaltalin. That's pretty straightforward. Yotza avodim. What about avodim who are ambulatory? No, Gemara says shehub karka. If you looked at an eved without any attachment, then you say, oh, an eved should be included because they're metaltalin and gufa mammon. The teretz is that they fall into the category of karka because they were always compared to karka for purposes of different halachas. Now, yotze shtaris, what about shtar? So we explained that the shtar is nothing but the paper, it's the token of the shtar. So if it's shtaris, even though they are metaltalin, right? But nevertheless, but there's no gufa mammon, right? There's no intrinsic value to the paper. It's the substance of the paper, what it talks about, that has value. So therefore, that's not included. Now, what about hegdish? So l'chayra hegdish, if they are movable items and gufa mammon, they should be included. So now he says, Omakro re'ehu. The pasuk says that if you give it to your fakit and ish el re'ehu, what does re'ehu mean? His fellow man. Fellow man at least indicates that we're talking about something that people can transact in, right? So re'ehu below shall hegdish. So the Gemara learns out from that, because of this prat, that it's re'ehu below shall hegdish. Hegdish is not your friend. In other words, re'ehu means in the normal course of commerce, I lend you something or we do something, whatever it is together, that's re'ehu. But hegdish is a different parasha entirely, right? Therefore, therefore we see that from this klal, prat klal, that if a shomer chinam, if a shomer chinam loses the object, then we don't make him swear. We do not make him swear that he was not negligent. In other words, we take it at face value. We don't let him swear like that. So that's how the Gemara wants to understand this item. Now, the next part of the Mishnah just moves over and says, and a shomer sachar doesn't have to pay. So again, it's the question of normally shomer sachar has to swear, right? He's chayiv b'gneva b'avein. So normally he has to swear. So we're saying no, that doesn't apply to him. Okay, ein mishalom. Frank the Gemara, the same question. How do we know shomer chinam? Okay, we have that pasuk. What about shomer sachar? How does shomer sachar fit into this equation? So we have a different pasuk. Yitin ish el re'ehu. same first cloud. If a person interacts with his friend, and we already know that that excludes hektish. Now, what's the prat? Chamor or shor or se prat. The one of these items is the prat. The whole behema lishmor calls it the cloud. And then there's another generalization that any animal that lishmor, again, that's the cloud. That's the cloud. So the cloud brought the cloud. We follow the same pattern. Cloud brought the cloud. Again, we have to look only at the prat to understand what is the meaning of that. And we say specifically, ma haprat mufurish davar metaltal for a moment. The same characteristics we show by Shamachino, that they're davar metaltal, right? The guf moment, after davar metaltal, the guf moment. Anything that is metaltalin and guf moment is excluded. Yotzakakos, same thing, shade of metaltalin. Yotza Eved Huksha Lakartos, same. And then we have by Shtoris, we have the same thing. Yotza Shtoris, Shafavich Vitalin Aina Gufan Mammon, right? And by Hegdish, Omakro Reyu. So when the Pasuk says Reyu, Reyu Veloy Hegdish. So we follow the same pattern for Shem Mechina and Shem Mesacher, even though a Shem Mesacher has a higher degree of responsibility. So by Geneva and Aveda, he would be chayiv. So we say that he does not have to make a shvua and he's exonerated. So therefore, that's a stronger chiddush than just Shem Mechina, because Shem Mechina is just pshia, but here there's more depth to it. But nevertheless, the pasuk says that you're not chayiv. So therefore, you're exempt from a shvua. Okay, so let's look at Rashi. V'chiyite lekama and b'hashoel Omar parsha rishona v'nemra b'shay mechinam ishniya b'shay mesacha. Right? Because of the parsha rishona v'nikra v'alhabayis v'akmin l'shvua. We're talking about a shvua hamavkid. So what is the subject here? He's saying the Indian is the shvua, which again we say shvua is not something you just do lightly. So if he has to swear, it's a chiyuv for him to swear. He swears that he wasn't negligent or whatever. But here, because it's hegdish, he doesn't even have to swear because we're dealing with hegdish, and the Torah, as we saw from the Klal Pratik Klal, does not make him swear. Hegdish is different, even though it could be gufa mama and davar metaltalin. Still, it's different. So we do not have that same issue. Okay, now that's the Mishnah, and the Gemara explains. Now for Raminu, so now the Gemara is going to ask a kasha to show that this is not quite accurate. What's the kasha? We learned in a Mishnah, right? We learned in a Mishnah in Shkolim. Take a look. I have that Mishnah here. Just a second. Mishnah.
Excuse me, Rabbi. What is the scenario for the Shom Mesacha that he ends up not having to swear, where in normal circumstances he would have to swear? So I don't understand what's the scenario we're talking about.
Okay, where the Shom Mesacha was entrusted by the Gizbar of Hegdish with watching some items that were Hegdish. So they entrusted him, which the Gizbar could do, and you can pay him. I mean, that's what we're saying, that you pay him a wage, and he's a guardian. He guards the Vedic Abad. Let's say it was something that was not easily locked up, and he has an achrayus to the Hegdish. So it's not different than any other case of Shom Mesacher, except that the object of his shmira was Hegdish as opposed to something that I or you gave him. In other words, he had a different achrayus. So you would think that achrayus, because it's Hegdish, should weigh on him even more heavily, because it is Hegdish. Says the Torah that there are certain conditions that don't require the Shomer Socher to swear. And again, this klal prata klal tells us that the word re'ehu excludes that only re'ehu issue swearing applies. It does not apply to hektish. So therefore, with hektish, he'd be exonerated. Okay.
So, Rabbi, is the thinking here that because it's Hekdesh, he would definitely be more careful, and therefore you can presume that he would take this even more carefully than he would if it wasn't Hekdesh, and that's why he's exonerated?
I'm not sure that you have to even assume that, Michael, that he would be more protective of it. I mean, you could certainly theorize, but just plainly on the surface, he may do the same level of shmirah that he would do if you gave it to him or I gave it to him. In other words, we don't necessarily impute that there is a higher degree. I mean, one might guard Hegdish more than anything else. I mean, that's a good. I mean, it's a good thought. But even if he didn't, even if he said, "I'm going to use the same standard of shmirah that I do when someone gives me a regular person gives me something to watch, I'm going to do the same standards for Hegdish." So then, if that's the case, then just like he has to pay to his friend, he should pay to Hegdish. So the Torah tells us that Hegdish has a different status, that even if you did the same, or even if you did better, it doesn't matter, because Hegdish, just like we say, you don't pay kefil for a gana, for dal v'hei. In other words, Hegdish is in a parsha by itself that isn't the common man. So there are certain chumras, but there's also certain kulas. Like you can't use hegdish to barter because it's that's improper. The gizber cannot, like we said last week, he can't lend the money for hegdish for an interest and he should get it back because hegdish can't lend money. Hegdish can hire a shomer sacher, but they can't lend money. So in this case with the shomer sacher, he's exempt. Just like all the other exemptions that the Torah gives us.
Rabbi, I'm having trouble because you're going in if you're shomer sacher for hekdesh, you're going in saying I don't need to worry about this. I can let up because if something happens, nothing's going to happen to me because I'm not obligated. So I don't understand why it's
so in other words, you're thinking that maybe he'll be less scrupulous with hegdish because he knows that with hegdish he can't be he doesn't have to come up with a shvua. That's your suggestion.
Yeah, he doesn't have to pay for it. He doesn't have to come up with a shvua. So it's I mean he's exonerated from the shvua. So if he says it, obviously there has to be a thinking behind this that he knows it's hekdesh, and that means that he would never swear falsely under those circumstances. Otherwise, right. It makes no sense.
Right. So it's a good question because that you may have to worry about that. But I think that what the Gemara here is telling us is that hektish has a certain kedusha that anybody would be careful with. In other words, you don't have, like you're saying, that maybe he'll be less scrupulous and less watchful of something because it's hegdish. That's not the norm. The norm is that when you're entrusted with something that's holy, that belongs to the Rebbeinu Shalom, that's even more of a weight on you. What you can argue, he'll be less scrupulous, but that's not the mindset of someone who is entrusted with hegdish, that he would be less. If anything,
but why would you pay him? Why would you pay him? In other words, why does the Beis Hamikdash have to pay him to watch that? Because you're not getting anything different for it.
That's yeah.
Right. So it should be that he's asked to watch it. I mean, as out of respect to Hekdesh, he should watch it for free. Right. And this is even making it worse because if I pay you, you don't have to even take a shvua. So why should I have to pay someone to watch it? Because kedusha. I mean, you're getting it's a major mitzvah to get this. So
it is an important mitzvah, but one could say that, you know, it may be rare because, like you say, in many cases, people would maybe volunteer to want to watch Hagdish, but the Gemara at least has to bounce that idea off. If it doesn't say anything about a Shom Sachar, one might get the idea that a Shom Sachar does have to make a Shvuah. So I think it's important for the Mishnah to enumerate, just to tell you that if they can't get a person to watch it without pay, for whatever reason, let's say it was at a time when everybody was busy, Shalosh Regalim, whatever, and no one had the time to, and again, it's not a slide on Hektish, but no one was able to do it. So then Hektish had to advertise, we need a shomer, we'll pay him. And so someone volunteered who otherwise, wouldn't come to the fore if he wasn't paid. Again,
but then how can you not? I still
I
have a
understand.
problem.
You're saying that everybody should jump at the opportunity to.
No,
Yeah,
but
but
even
what?
so, then the idea is okay. If that's the case, then you should have to take the shvuah because you're taking money in this case. And if you're innocent, then what else are you getting out of the shvuah? So you
So
to
on
be
the surface,
exonerated from a shvuah when you're getting paid for it seems,
So
right,
what is
right.
the
oxymoron.
Right. So
what
you
is the
in theory, you're right. That should be what the thinking is, that you should have to pay. So the chiddush of the Mishnah is that pasuk, the klalu pratu klau, takes it out of what you are right in saying should be the norm. The norm should
so
be that you pay him and he has an achrayus. But the pasuk overrides that and says that by hegdish, even though the seichel should be what you're saying, but by hegdish it doesn't apply because it's not reyehu. In other words, you're right. You're right in your thinking, and that's why we need a special exemption from the Torah to say that what is normally the proper way of thinking doesn't apply to hegdish.
so
So
what
again,
Michael is really saying, and I had the same thought. What are the assumptions here for this particular scenario? We either assume that people are honest or whatever, but you have to still protect Hegdish in these
correct.
assumptions. So, what are the basic assumptions when it comes to a Shomer Sofer that's dealing with Hegdish?
Okay, good question. And the answer is that and this goes back to the previous discussion. If a person is going to guard hektish, it's not, it very well could be, I won't do anything to impugn hektish. I'm going to be a shomer with meticulous care to make sure that the hektish is not compromised. If anything, it enforces that thinking that Michael mentioned before. Not that a person's going to say, "Oh, it's hegdish, I can get away with it." If anything, you and I and anybody else are trusted with hegdish. Like for instance, let's say the shul calls you up and says, "We really, really need someone to do something on behalf of the shul, and everybody's busy, and we can't get volunteers." Right? Menashe can speak to that. So what we're gonna pay you for that obligation. For instance, here in Florida, in the many shuls, every balkora gets paid. So by us, it's volunteer. We have Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of people who can do it. Here, everybody gets paid. They get paid because otherwise you might not have a balkora for Shabbos because either people can, won't, whatever. So you say, we're gonna pay you, and this is where they have regular balkoras who get paid every week. So it's not far-fetched that the Bedek Habayis would say, you know what, we need Shmira on this. We have no one to step up. As much as people say it's an honor, we don't have anybody. So we have to pay. The Chiddush is that they're allowed to pay. You're not allowed to lend money, but the Bedek Habayis can pay money for something that will enhance or better the Bedek Habayis.
I mean, other examples that I know it's in one of the Haftorahs. I know every time I see it, or once a year, I guess, where they had issues with the maintenance of the Beis Hamikdash, and I don't remember the exact story. Basically, they set up the first tzedakah box, with a slot inside, and that they would then everybody would come and they would put their money in, and then they would carefully open that up to then go ahead and pay the workers for fixing the Beis Hamikdash.
Right, right. Right. You touch on something interesting that we're about to learn is the pushka theory but anyway, but you're right. So in other words, Bedek Habayis has obligations, and not it's great to have a shem mechinam, but you don't always have a shem mechinam. So when you have a shem mesachar, again, the assumption that the Gemara is working with is that not that they're going to be lax, but they're going to be maybe extra careful because it is kodesh. So then. Swearing, which would normally be the case in Shem Sachar, says the Gemara that the Mishnah is saying there is no shvuah, not because of it's either he's going to be more or less. It's a pasuk of the Torah. The Torah says outright that by klal uprat the klal donin ke'ena prat, and here the one of the pratim that we learn out from the klal is that Hegdush is exempt from the normal the normal halachas that we hear in Nezikin and other places, and one of those is the shomer. The shomer who gets hired does not have to swear. Again, the assumption is at face value that no one is going to slough off and not do their best job. But when it comes to the norm, you and I, okay, you have to make a shvuah. If anything, just to tighten the screws a little bit, but with the Beis Hamikdash and surrounding the Beis Hamikdash, we say that the Torah specifically says don't do that. And maybe one of the reasons is the opposite of what we were talking about. This encourages people to want to step up and make that special effort, because mostly people make an effort for themselves. I need something, I'll hire a Shoy Masach. So it's to my benefit because I need whatever I need. But for the third party, for the Beis Hamikdash, it's not the same as your mama. It's not the same as your business interests. So the Bedek Habayis has to, I'm going to use the word entice, but they have to say to people, yes, it's a big mitzvah. You got to do it. In the case of Shem Masachar, we'll pay you, and we're going to assume that you will do the best job. And at the end, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, if that's the case and you're doing it, no shvuah. So we really have to rely on that klal uprat to klal, because otherwise, Michael, you'd be right that why is the Bedek Habayis? Why isn't it like everybody else? It's a standalone. But we see that Shebedava Shebekadusha, there are different standards, just like we've been learning till now. There's no Ona, and we talked about different things. So now we talk about the idea of Shem Mechinam Shem Mesachar.
Hello.
And
Hello.
there's no Achrayas. Okay.
Hello.
So now that we established that, now the Gemara has a problem. V'raminu. So now I'm going to ask you a question from a Mishnah in Shkolim. What does the Mishnah say? Now, this is very interesting. Everybody's chayv in machzas shekel. Now, if you're living outside of Yerushalayim, just like with Masras and Truma, we had all this discussion about what happens. What happens? The town, the community hires a shaliach, and that shliach is going to take all the money to Yerushalayim. Now we're not talking about animals that you have to redeem and everything else. So just the money. Everybody pools his chatzik shekel, and you have a lot of shkolim, and they send it through a courier. Now, luck would have it, v'nikvu osha avdu, and the shaliach, went at night to the inn. Somebody came and stole the shekalim, the bag full of shekalim, or he lost it, one of the two. So, which can happen. Okay, so what does that Mishnah say? What does that Mishnah say? Im mishnus arma hatruma. Okay, so here's the process. The process of the Beis Hamikdash was, and Rashi will say that tells them in a minute. is that when the money came in, the couriers, you talk about Menashe about a pushkin, there were slots or boxes or pushka boxes, whatever, all over Yerushalayim and at the Beis Hamikdash, where the shaliach could deposit the money. So he puts it. There's no human intervention. He puts it into the pushka. So now he's got hundreds of shekalim, puts it into the pushka. Now it's already on its way to the Bedek Habayis. Okay. Now here's the so what happens? So that all that money is collected regularly by the Gizber, just like our Shaliach Menashe, whoever collects the tzedakah, and you give it to the rabbi or you give it to whoever. There, they had a special place, a room, a special place where all the monies, all the Chatziyah shekel, Matzah shekel came. So when they maybe every day, every other day, whenever they went to collect the money from the pushka, they brought it to this one central location. That was the process. Then what happened? Then when they had to use the Matzah shekel, right, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, then they would take out what they needed from the box, from the room rather, not the box, it's already in the room, from the room, and then they would buy what they needed. Otherwise, it stays in the room. So Pesach, they took out what they needed for Pesach, but Sukkot and Shavuos stayed in the room. So that was the process. Now, says the Gemara, Im mishitar mahatruma, in other words, if step one is putting it in the pushka, step two is transferring it to the room, step three is taking from the room and using it for the yom tov. So, in Mishit Nisarma Truma, if step three had already been accomplished, that they took it out of the room, so for Pesach, let's say, and they wanted to use it, and then it was stolen or lost, right? So now, in whose custody was the money? In the Gizbar Hegdish, into the treasury. Says the Gemara, Nishboren, the Gizbar, the top of Nun Ches. So we're saying in this Mishnah that the Shaliach, the person who brought the money, has to swear that he was, let's say he was a Shem Mechinam, that he wasn't Posheya. And who does he swear to? To the Gizbar. The Gizbar is the one who, it's in his custody. So he's the balabos. He's nominally the owner. It's the Beis Hamikdash, but he is the Shaliach of the owner. So if we're saying that someone has to swear, who do they swear to? So this Mishnah is assuming that you have to swear. Okay? That's what the Mishnah is telling you. You have to swear. And who do you swear to? You swear to the Gizbar. But the Imlav, if the money had not yet left the room, in other words, it was transferred from one to two, but never left two, it's still in the room. And then, there is Geneva Aveda. We'll see what that means. How does there Geneva Aveda? Then who's the Balabos? The Balabos are the people who gave the money, right? So it says, Lishboin Levenei her ear. He has to swear to the townfolk or the people to whom who gave the Matzah Shekel. Now, mind you, there's Matzah Shekel coming from all over Eretz Yisrael. It's not just from one town, right? Here you have one incident with the person who brought it from, let's say, I don't know what, maybe it was from Tzfat. Okay, he came from Tzfat, carried all the money, and the money was lost or stolen. And it was not taken out of the room to be pulled out, say, for Pesach. Nishboin the B'nai Ha'ir. Then he has to swear to the B'nai Ha'ir, because the B'nai Ha'ir are still the balabatim of this money. Now, okay, what happens? Lest you think that the treasury of the Beis Hamikdash is going to be shortchanged. Now that the shekalim have not yet been pulled out, B'nai Ha'ir shokla machrayim tachtayim. So there's now it's mandatory that the Bnei Ha'ir who gave that money have to pony up another machzis shekel because their machzis shekel was stolen or lost through no fault of their own. But since they hired a shaliach, so that shaliach is kamosam, and if the shaliach lost it and it didn't make its way into the proper channel, then they have to give a second machzis shekel, right? Okay, so
Rabbi,
now
wait a minute. I want to understand this. So, it is the townspeople. Let's say it's one town. Let's say it's Sfat, one town. They give to the shaliach. It's a paid shaliach.
right.
At that point, is it the shaliach's responsibility? If it's a shomer sachar, then he's on the hook.
Yeah,
So,
except that remember, he doesn't have to swear.
well, but what I don't understand is when does it become hekdesh? So,
Which step?
as the shaliach, they're paying him to bring it, but it's not brought yet. So if he were smart, I'm not sure it existed, but he would buy a surety bond to
Exactly.
ensure that it would cost him some money, and that would be part of the fee he charged as being the shaliach. But then it would be on him, and the insurer would be on the hook, presumably, unless he was grossly negligent. It may not have existed in those days, but the fact that he's a paid shaliach, it's not hekdesh yet. As him being the shaliach, it hasn't gone there. So how's he exonerated from taking an oath? Because you're paying him as a shomer sachar to ultimately deliver it, but it's not delivered yet.
You say it's not Hegdish. The minute the townspeople put it in a container, this is all the Machzis shekel.
Yeah, but I don't think it's hekdesh at that
I
point.
think that's really a key issue is it
It
hekdesh
has to
yet?
have a higher level than just
Well,
stuff in
I
a
think that's the
metallic.
key question in my mind, and this would make this case, and I think this is an important question. Is this if you had the exact same thing, but instead of collecting money for hectares, you were collecting money for some community project, okay? You're gonna buy a new Sefer Torah for B'nai Brak, and 1,000 people in Tzvat are donating a half a shekel each towards it, okay? If would that have the same halachas as this, or is it specifically that the situation of hekdesh because of the masis of shekel? Because if the money becomes hekdesh as soon as they collect it together and hand it off to be delivered, then they've fulfilled their obligation of masis of shekel. On the other hand, if it's not truly a masis of shekel for hekdesh until it gets to the base of Migdash, or at least gets to Yerushalayim, then there is, even though I would argue that the shaliach should be paying back each of these people for this extra half masis shekel they have to pay, they'd still be on the hook because their masis shekel never made it to
But
hekdesh.
this box of money, you can't do other things with it. You can't trade it. You can't do,
True.
give it to somebody in exchange. This thing here is locked up. The minute the townspeople put it together, they put a seal on the box. That's it. That box has to go to Yerushalayim.
But it's not there
Nothing
yet.
else you can do with it.
But it's not there yet.
Well, but so let's go back to the issue of maestros that we've been talking about for months.
You have other things. But you have other things in our religion that if you just have the machshava, the job is done.
Well, and Rabbi's he's smiling, so I know he knows the answer to this. But
He's enjoying this.
he started to say that you would have to go, because he didn't have to take a shvua. You'd have to go back to the townspeople, and they have to give it again, which is a sign that it's not hekdesh at that point. Because if they already discharged their responsibility, then they would have gotten credit for the mitzvah. They wouldn't
They-
need to do it. So what's the answer, Rabbi?
But
So
there's
this
two,
discussion,
but
all
Michael,
this
there are two
discussion,
parts.
go ahead, Jay.
There are two parts. There are two phases. The first phase is Tzfat has to put it all together and put a seal around it. The second phase is when it actually shows up in the base.
But putting the seal on, the question is, does that solidify its status? So I don't think it does, because
Takes care
you're
of
paying
phase
someone
one.
to bring it there, and it's not brought there, so it's not officially. But that's the question.
Okay, so this fascinating discussion, there's two things to look at. The first thing is, and I think you pointed that out, it has, okay, does it have to arrive into the coffers of the Beis Hamikdash in order to have this Kedusha of Hegdish? And the answer is no, and that's the answer to our question from last week. Last week, when we asked what happens if someone donated the stones, and then they built the Beis Hamikdash, they built an altar, a mezbech, whatever they built, and there was extra stones. What do you do with that? Well, it's already Kodesh, even though it's not Hegdish, even though it's not the finished product, which is what we say makes it Kodesh. But the fact that someone donated, so what? The Beis Hamikdash will use that money for something else. They won't build; they'll use it for something else. They'll pay the Shomer Masachar. They'll pay the Shomer Masachar who they need to watch, and that's the money they'll use. But it is already considered as if it has not the Kedusha of Hagdish, but belongs to the Beis Hamikdash. So that answers that question. The answer is yes. It does belong to the Beis Hamikdash. It can't
Even
be
if it's not in Jerusalem, even if it has not reached Jerusalem yet, the courier is, you're hiring, the townspeople are hiring the courier to bring to the Beis Hamikdash. The fact that they've handed it over makes it hekdesh at that point, or does it have to get to Jerusalem?
Right. So let's not look at Jerusalem. Let's look at the townspeople. The townspeople have an obligation for Machzis HaShekel. They fulfill their obligation. They fulfill their obligations of Machzis HaShekel, put it in the hands of the courier, and the shliach went to Jerusalem. Okay, we've done our mitzvah.
But have they? Here's another thought. If you're one person, okay, let's ignore a whole town, and I want to give a donation to somebody, a private person, Yerushalayim, a poor person, and I hand it to this, and it's not Meister, because Meister is different. You're exchanging, it already has a status. It's just an ordinary donation. So I give it to the shaliach goes off to Yerushalayim to hand it to the poor person. The shaliach is an extension of my hand. And so it's not tzedakah yet until it's in the hand of the ani.
Except the mitzvah.
One second.
The mitzvah is not in the receipt; it's in the giving. You have an applies to Machzis HaShekel.
No, that's what I'm saying. Machzis HaShekel, I think it's different.
When you make a pledge at an appeal in shul.
That pledge has
$100.
That pledge has a kedusha to it.
What?
That pledge has a kedusha to it.
Exactly. You owe that, right?
Right.
But the question is, in the case of Machzis HaShekel, so then the question is, if have I fulfilled my Machzis HaShekel when that Machzis HaShekel makes it to the Beis Hamikdash, or if I fulfilled it if I hand it off to a shaliach?
Oh, okay. So let's take a closer look at this inyan by saying the following. Clearly, and you pointed this out, Menashe, the fact that the Mishnah says there in Shkolim that the person has to send a second Machzis HaShekel tells you that the achrayus is on the person. Why? Because the general rule is that the Beis Hamikdash cannot take a loss. In other words, the Beis Hamikdash should not be the loser in the case that there is this Geneva or Aveda. So somehow, the Beis Hamikdash should be made whole. But let me say something further. In order to understand this Gemara doesn't, because how do you have Geneva Aveda if it's already in the Beis Hamikdash? So let's understand that we're not talking about the Geneva Aveda in real time. We're talking about when it became known to the giver. In other words, let's say that it reached the pushka and was transferred to the place, the room where it was collected, and then it became known to the Bnei Yair, oh, wait a minute, there was a Geneva and Aveda. In other words, the Geneva and when did they actually know there was a Geneva and Aveda, right? And that determines whether or not the Gizbar is the one who is chayiv or the Bnei Yair are chayiv. Because remember, in the circumstance where the money was taken out of the room for Pesach, let's say, and was already beginning to be used for Pesach, that's not on the townsfolk anymore. They do not have to give a second machzos shekel because they fulfill their obligation. Now it's the treasurer who has the achrayus. Of course, the treasurer is not going to repay it to the Beis Hamikdash, but that's why the courier has to swear, I was not negligent, and therefore.
Well, wait a minute, Rabbi. Wait a minute.
Because Hegdish is part.
It's not hekdesh. So I'm trying to understand the Machzisa shekel example. It's a shomer sachar. You're giving it to that shomer sachar. Is it hekdesh the moment you hand it to him or not? It's not brought to the town yet. It's not in the building. You give it to the shomer sachar. The shomer sachar, if it's not hekdesh yet, he's on the hook and he has to make it up. And even if he swears, he should not be exonerated because it's not hekdesh at that point.
Right, but the answer is that it is. It has, once that machzos shekel leaves your hand and goes to the shaliach, that machzos shekel already has the kedusha of the mitzvah of machzos shekel. Machzos shekel is a mitzvah.
But
And
if it has the
status of that money has changed the minute they give it to the shliach.
Then why do they have to give another one?
Exactly.
And the point is that I don't care.
Here. So no, but the reason why they have to give another one, in the case, when do they have to give another one? Only when the knowledge of the Geneva Aveda happened prior to it leaving the central point, where it was still quote unquote the Bnei Yair.
But wait a minute.
Yeah, but if it's already hektish at that point, if it's hektish when you give it to, once the shaliach takes it to leave town to go to Yerushalayim, then you should have fulfilled your obligation of machlis shekel.
Exactly.
If you didn't fulfill it, then it shouldn't be hektish, and you'd be on the hook.
Right, but
Can't have both ways.
You're all right, but that's the chiddush of the Mishnah. The Mishnah now bifurcates the responsibility depending on where on the timeline this machzos shekel is.
How can you exonerate the shomer sachar in that situation? How can you do that? He's got an obligation. Okay, it's hekdesh, and then it goes back. He's being paid to watch it. He was negligent, even if not grossly negligent. That's what he's getting.
He might not have even been negligent. He could have been held up at gunpoint by a non-Jew. We don't know what happened. But the point is, the question is, was it hektish? And the townspeople simply should not be responsible for fulfilling that mitzvah again, or was it not responsible and not hektish?
Right. So there's several chidushim here. There's several novel points of halacha that are taking place. Number one, when the townspeople gave the machzos shekel, and they fulfilled their pledge, then that's a davar shebekadusha because they gave it. Forget about that it didn't arrive yet. That's step one. Step two is you have this courier, and you're right, Michael, Hashem, the Soch is chayv Geneva Aveda, but that's why the Torah says, klal upratu klal, that you can't have Geneva Aveda swearing for the Shomer Sachar by davar shebekadusha. That's step two. So it is kodesh, but there's an exemption. I know you're having a tough time getting around that because he's chayving in Eva Aveda. Sure he is, but not for hegdish. And this machzos shekel already is hegdish. Even though it didn't arrive at the Beis Hamikdash, it has a inyan of Hegdish. Therefore, the Shai Mesacha doesn't have to swear, and if he doesn't have to swear, then now the question is who's responsible, because the Beis Hamikdash shouldn't take a hit. So somewhere along the line, you got to point fingers at somebody. Then the Mishnah says, you know who we're going to point fingers at? If it was pulled out of the room and was getting ready for the third phase, which is what? Giving for the Karbanos of Pesach or Shavuos Sukkos, then the Gizbor is the one who's chayiv. But if it had not yet taken out of the room, and that's when the Bnei Yair became aware of what had happened, then yes, it's a novel theory. They now have to, even though they fulfill the mitzvah machzor shekel, they have to pay a second time because their interest stacked against the Beis Hamikdash interest of not losing the money, of not being on the short end of the stick here. The Beis Hamikdash has a superior interest. But you're right, that doesn't sound like it should be. But these are the different steps of the halacha. One, that it's hegdish. It's already hegdish, no question. Now, so then you ask, why should they have to pay a second time? They pay a second time because if they don't, then the Beis Hamikdash will take a loss, and we can't allow that.
This is the origin of insurance. So, you got to protect yourself. So somebody here has to purchase a surety bond, and there's got to be part of the cost has to be absorbed in that so that this never happens. Because how practically do you go back to everyone in time if you find out there's a late loss to make sure there's enough money there? So they may not have had it at the time, but as you pointed out at the beginning, Rabbi, if it's from all over the country and so many different places, and that you have to try to find out, and there was a loss that was contained earlier, but it seems like even the Beis Hamikdash has to have an insurance policy. So the insurance policy is we'll go back to the donors and make them give again. That just seems not only unrealistic, it seems unfair.
But the Beis Hamikdash has a ledger, and they say, we know how many people live in Tzfat. This is what we're expecting to come from Tzfat. And if it doesn't show up, somebody has to.
But you're assuming that everybody gave it to one shaliach. That's not necessarily.
No.
It doesn't matter which. They can have 10. They can have 10 shlichim leaving Tzfat.
But you don't know who was with which shaliach, so you
doesn't matter.
And some people, more than that. Some people might have been. They had a business trip to Yerushalayim, so they gave it in person.
Right.
So you have a debit card situation here. The Beis Hamikdash is expecting so much money through Machzor HaShekel from the city of Tzfat.
Right, but you can't go back and levy that on any individual because you can't prove who gave and who didn't.
Right. Right. You don't have the Machzor HaShekel itself was fungible. They were all the same. You can't tell. You can only tell if you see, there was a bag. We know we registered that we got a bag of 1,000. We waited. It was 1,000 shkolim from Tzfat, and now this bag has disappeared or never got to the right place.
When they were delivering it, they had to be marking their ribbon in their box that this is from Tzfat.
That was for the big bags, but yeah.
But
you don't know which people
that everything came in one clump, and that's not necessarily the case.
But they were able to have an accounting ledger. Even if businessmen are bringing partial out of its Tzfat, there may be 10 deliveries from Tzfat, but they're still legitimate. It doesn't have to be one delivery.
Yeah, but you don't know who it's coming from, and the point is that you have to go back to each person, and they don't have to take a shavua either that they gave a second time in that situation.
Well, again, you can assume that everybody. Even if there was multiple shluchim from Tzfat, and maybe there was or wasn't, but even if there were, then the people who gave to shaliach number one will know who they are. 10 people, 12 people.
But you're
100
assuming
people.
that it came in different parts and that all of it was taken, but it could be only part
That's what we're assuming.
taken.
Yeah,
And you wouldn't
that's-
know necessarily what was taken because it was commingled.
no. I mean, the assumption here is that his bag of matzahs a shekel was either lost or stolen. So everything that he collected from 100 people or 200 people, whatever, that's no longer here. So the question is, I gave my matzah shekel, I fulfilled my obligation. Yes, you did, but now the chiddush of the Mishnah is that depending where on the timeline the money was sitting, in the pushka, in the room, in the already pulled out, ready to be spent for the korbanos. So this is the chiddush of the Mishnah. Depending on where it was, that's who is the balabos. In other words, if it had not yet been pulled for Yantiv, then the Bnei Yair are the quote rightful owners because they donated, and it's not the gizbor of
You
the
still
Hegdish.
have to have an investigation to find out where it went wrong, because this is
I mean, okay. So the courier, who we're going to believe here, for purposes of this point, we're going to believe him that it was stolen or lost. We're going to believe him. Again, we're going to have a little bit more of an issue later on, but let's say now we're going to believe him. It was stolen. Okay. Now, when we find out that it was stolen, where is it in the timeline? That's the key question. And if we say it's in the timeline of still being in the room, that's the Bnei Yair's responsibility. It's pulled out of the room, then it is the Gizber's responsibility. And what we're saying is that who does the courier have to swear to, as the pasuk tells us, because Hegdish does not collect. It says Re'ehu, so he doesn't have to swear, but he is swearing. But he's swearing for something else, and we'll see in a minute what he's swearing for. But so who does he swear to? So that's why we make that line of demarcation, depending on where it is, that's who we have to swear to. And again, you can say it's not fair, it's not right, they paid, but again, the halacha now is that machzas shekel becomes kodesh, even though it has not arrived at the Beis Hamikdash and is used for Beis Hamikdash purposes, which is the same as the case of the stones. The stones for the Mizbeach, you donated, okay? Now you're getting back more stones than you can use. What happens to those extra stones? Well, they're not going to be for the Mizbeach, but they are owned by the Beis Hamikdash, and the Gizber can use the money from those stones any way he sees fit. So,
Rabbi, can I ask one question?
Sure.
What happens if somebody had to sell everything they had to come up with the Maxisa shekel because they were poor and they can't afford it again? They've fulfilled the mitzvah. What happens?
Well, it's a good question. The chiyuv is to repay. If someone can't pay because he doesn't have, then again, the question is, if he can't scrape together the funds, he can't do the mitzvah. He simply can't do the mitzvah.
But he's done the mitzvah. You just said
no, he did the mitzvah. You're saying that
he fulfilled
he barely,
the mitzvah.
Yeah, he did the mitzvah.
Can't come up with it. I mean, it would seem that if it's from the townspeople, they would have to make up the difference. But I just want to make sure the mitzvah is fulfilled at the point that they gave the first time.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a portion of a shekel. We're not talking about selling his whole, things in his house.
It's not a lot of money. It's not a lot of money. But again, Michael's point is if you have someone who is really, really poor and he had to scrape it together because he has so many other, responsibilities, family, otherwise, so now how is he going to get another matzah shekel? I mean, it's a separate question. And again, like everything else, some of these questions we have to look into a little bit further. Does he have an achrayus if he can't pay? I would just say that, like in any mitzvah, you have an achrayus to do a mitzvah, and if you don't have the wherewithal, then again, the community should help you. You yourself are getting tzedakah, let's say, from the community, and from that tzedakah, you have to give the matzah shekel. So it's kind of like truma and truma's maser. The kohen gets truma, but from that truma he has to give maser. So it's the same kind of thing. Is that he has an achrayus to pay, and you would think he fulfilled his achrayus, but the Mishnah is telling us he didn't fulfill his achrayus. But let's just finish the Mishnah because this is a fascinating discussion. But now the discussion is going to go to a higher level. Nimtzeu. What happens if these monies that were lost or stolen are found, meaning they found the lost money, or the ganef comes and of his own volition says, I can't bear to have the sin, I'm giving you back the money. All of a sudden, and they've collected another machzas a shekel from that same group of people. Now you have a double. So what do you think? You would think, okay, the townspeople fulfilled it the first time, they should be reimbursed. Says the Mishnah, Nimtzu, if they found the Aveda, or Shehitzri Aganavim, or the Ganavim returned it, Elu ve'elu shikolim heim. Now you have double the amount of shkolim. Not only do you have double, ve'ein olin lahem l'shana haba, you can't say, okay, my first shkolim are for this year, and my other shkolim are for next year. I have a deposit for next year. Says the Mishnah, no, ve'ein olin lahem l'shana haba. You can't put it on account for next year. So, Michael, your first question is going to be, this is totally unfair, because it's very one-sided, and it is. It is. The Mishnah is telling us that now you could argue that since the Hegdish can't be the loser, and they found the money, Hegdish is no longer the loser, why should it not count for next year? That's the real question. In this situation, you've already given, the money has come back, but the minute you gave a second machzas shekel just to make your point, it becomes kodesh the minute you give it. And since you have in mind machzas shekel for this year, that was your intent. You can't say, oh, my intent was for this year. You found the money. Let's slide that intent to next year. You can't do that.
This is why it makes the Shomer Sachar getting off without anything in this situation.
But he's not. But he's not. We're going to get to the point where he's not really getting off. He's not getting off, and I'll explain why shortly. But for purposes of swearing of the Aveda, that he lost the Veda, there is no swearing because of the word Re'ehu. So he's, for liability purposes, for purposes of being a chroi for Genev and Aveda, which the Shomer Sachar is, it's suspended for Hegdish because of the puzzle. Because of the puzzle.
Can't the townspeople take their money back from the second one, and they can put it in a safe and say, this is Hegdish, but we're going to use it next year?
Oh, so the Chiddush, you're right. That's logic. Logic is we found it, let's use what we found, and everything else should be suspended. Says the Mishnah, since you had in mind to replace it for this year, because you should call them a loss, you can't transfer that intention and say, okay, everything good, we found it, let it go to next year. That's precisely what the Mishnah says you can't do.
Can't put it in escrow or something?
No, it's not. That's the point. It's not an escrow for next year. The Beis Hamikdash now has the extra machzas shekel to spend on what it's
so the bottom line is that Tzfas must have new machzas shekel every year. People have to donate
every year, correct? And if you have to give double for 1 year because of a mishap, since the Beis Hamikdash is not the one who's going to take the hit, which is that's the klal, they're not achroi, you have to be achroi. That's how the Torah looks at it. Now, Michael, to your question, because it's nagging at you, and it should. This is a Shomer Sachar. It's a Shomer Sachar. It's not a Shomer Chinam. Omar Shmuel, this is the final line of this, says Shmuel, until now, we did not identify that it was a Shomer Chinam or a Shomer Sachar. Okay? It could have been a Shomer Chinam, and this whole discussion was Shomer Chinam. Says Shmuel, no, This is talking about a Shem Masachah b'nishboin little schorim. They still have to swear, but they're no longer swaying that what? That I was negligent, or that the Aveda, it's a Geneva Aveda, for which I'm responsible. That swear goes off because of Re'ehu, b'nishboin little schorim. But they still have to make a shvua in order to get their schar, what they're entitled to. So, lest you think that the Shem Masachah can say, "I'm getting away with it." Remember, a shvua is no simple thing, and we're talking about erlicha people. We're not talking about stam people. So, if you have an erlicha person and he has the shiur of a shvua, he's not going to take that lightly when he swears in the name of God. So lest you think, oh, we exonerated him from a shvua because it's the Beis Hamikdash, you're right, we exonerated him. But there's another shvua, and that's the shvua that he has to swear. Forget about the negative. Oh, I'm not responsible for the Gneva Aveda. There is a affirmative shvua that he has to say. Oh, I'm getting my pay. I have to swear to get my pay. Two separate shvuas. Not the same.
Rabbi, if they hired him again to do the second one, still no shvua because it's all hekdesh, and
Correct.
only after they recover that there is a shvua. So he can theoretically get paid twice.
Well, in order to collect his money, he has to have fulfilled the obligation. What does fulfilling the obligation mean? Bringing the money to Yerushalayim. Now, if it's lost or stolen, and the balabatim of Tzfas have to give another machzah shekel, he's still in service to them. He hasn't fulfilled his obligation of bringing it to the Beis Hamikdash. He has to take the second machzah shekel, bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. Then he can swear, I fulfilled my obligation. I want to get paid.
He doesn't get paid twice.
No, he's paid only once because he didn't fulfill his obligation the first time because it was stolen.
That makes sense. Okay.
That makes sense. So he's exonerated from the shvua of the normal shvua that a Shem Masachah makes, but he's still, in order to get his money at the end of the day, he has to make a shvua. I guess the compromise is that after everything is said and done, yes, the people of Sfat, only in the case where it was not released from the room, right? We know that because if it's released, then it's the Gizber. So in the case where it hasn't been released from the room, and we're saying the Bnei Ha'ir are the ones who are responsible, then if they're responsible vis-a-vis the Beis Hamikdash, they have a responsibility to fulfill. Yes, they gave machzos shekel, but the Beis Hamikdash cannot be the loser. So they have to look somewhere for the money. So who do they go to? Well, if it was pulled out, then they go to the Gizber. But if it was not pulled out, then they go to Bnei Ha'ir. And as much as, Michael, you might think this is an unfair process, the Torah is telling us that, yes, the first machzos shekel is Kodesh, and they fulfill their obligation, but as long as that money didn't actually go into the treasury physically, it's still out there. And so the Beis Hamikdash cannot be the loser here. They have to go to someone to collect it. So on balance, that's how the halacha looks at it. I mean, that's what the Mishnah is saying is the halacha. That's what the Torah means. Is that the townsfolk have to make up the difference, but not only make up the difference, but you see how far it goes. That even if it's found, they no longer get credit for the first monies they gave or the second monies. And the whole thing is to the benefit of the Beis Hamikdash, even though there's a double portion, and you could argue it should go for next year. Who's going to be the loser? If anything, it's a windfall to the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Mishnah, the halacha is, no, your intent was to give it for Tafshin Pei Gimel, and therefore you can't give it for Tafshin Pei Dalet or whatever, because even though because that's your machshava.
So they should have hired. So the smart thing for Tzfas is to hire a two-person shliach. In other words, two people go together for protection, because it's cheaper to hire a second shliach than to have to do the whole machzos shekel twice.
Right.
So they can buy an insurance policy by hiring a second shliach.
Look, if you want to hire two Shomrei Sachrim and pay each of them so that they can guard to each other or guard together, that's okay. But let's just assume in the norm, you're dealing with an Eilicha person. He's a courier by trade. He knows the route. He knows everything. And unfortunately, either he was robbed or this particular time, again, we'll see what that means, how it was lost. But unfortunately, he lost it. Unfortunately, he lost it. So, look, those things happen, and we're not going to point fingers and say, "Oh, he's a bad guy." And again, each step of the halacha along the way gives us a different chiddush. One, that you have to give it a second time. Two, that it does not get counted for your donation on credit for next year. And three, we're not going to let the Shemer Sacha off the hook, because even though he doesn't make a shvua for the Geneva and Aveda, he has to make a shvua anyway. And we're going to assume, again, these are all assumptions, we're going to assume that he's an Eilicha guy and he would not swear that that he didn't do something improper, but he's entitled to get paid. At the end of the day, he arrived at the Beis HaMikdash, albeit not the way you wanted to. He arrived at the Beis HaMikdash. He deposited in the Beis HaMikdash. He fulfilled his responsibility, notwithstanding what happened. Again, they're all chedushim. They're all stepping stones to get to where we want to get, and say that he makes the shvua, he gets paid. And yeah, the only people who are out here, to the extent that you consider them to be out, is the townspeople who have to make good because they it was on their watch, so to speak, that the shaliach lost it. But again, that's the chiddush here, to tell you that the way things, you look at it from the standpoint of the Rabbeinu Shalom, is that everything belongs to Rabbeinu Shalom anyway. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, it belongs to Rabbeinu Shalom. So he's giving you your chelik, and your chelik responsibility is to give back to Rabbeinu Shalom. So if you want to give back to Rabbeinu Shalom and there's a mishap under these particular circumstances, Rabbeinu Shalom comes back and says, "You've got to make good. I gave it to you. It didn't quite reach me for whatever reason, and there are legitimate reasons. You've got to make good." So at the end of the day, there's a certain satisfying seichel to all of this, is that the Rebbeinu Shalom can't be cheated. And so in order to make good to the Rebbeinu Shalom, you've got to pay a second time. I guess maybe the bigger chiddush is that, sure, you willingly gave it, but give me a break too. I mean, if I pay double, let me at least have some relief, next year, because I definitely gave. The teretz is that you can't, because your machshava is to replace the matzah shekel, shows you the level of kedusha, that it has to go to where you had the machshava, which is for this year, for this giving, and next year, it's Hashem, you'll give again. So that's to me a great chiddush, but yet that's the halacha. So anyway, we're still not yet finished with the subject, but at least to this point, we know the rules and we know who's responsible. And at the end of the day, everybody's it all falls into place. The shaliach gets paid. These townspeople pay, and they have to pay a second time. And if it was taken out of the room into the hands of the gizbar, then you're exonerated. So there is a sort of a loophole here, but only if the money had already flown. The flow through was all the way into the hands of the gizbar. Then you can no longer turn to the bnei ha'ir, because they're no longer responsible. They're only owners up to a point. So even though it's kedusha out of their hands, their achrayus to the Rebbeinu Shalom flows through to when it goes into the pushka, and from the pushka to the collection room. That's still their achrayus. Once it leaves the collection room, it's no longer their achrayus. Anyway, these are interesting kedushim that we're being taught here. That this is the way the whole system went. So Mitchell will stop and.